This is a story of self-inquiry, how a defining moment in the form of a dream inspired a search for truth. My journey, what many would call a spiritual path, brought moments of clarity with a fresh perspective on life, along with clarity on many ideas and concepts that were ingrained in me. What I define as clarity, some other person may label as confusion, and that's perfectly fine. One problem that I have with some organized religions is that they celebrate staunch faith, but any kind of doubt on matters of faith is resisted strongly. Doubt, I think, is essential for self-inquiry. It creates an opening to explore the possibilities. It was in the summer of 2008 that I had a bizarre dream. This dream forced me to dig deeper into the meaning of life. I saw my dad, who had died 18 years earlier, back in 1990. He appeared to me in the form of a holographic light. He started communicating with me telepathically. There were no words spoken, but I could understand everything he had to say. He conveyed to me a message which said, "Truth of life is love. Love of life is death. Death of life is unknown. To know the unknown is truth." My dad soon disappeared and I woke up from the dream. For me, it was more like a nightmare. I was sweating and shivering. This woke my wife up, totally disoriented by my strange behavior. Her initial reaction was that perhaps I had a heart attack. I fumbled to find words. I asked her to repeat after me what I thought was the message from my father. Initially, that's exactly how I saw things. I thought that it was the spirit of my father in literal sense. But as I walked deeper onto the spiritual path, I saw a shift in the way I started looking at life. Today I think that it was my subconscious mind communicating in the form of someone I could trust, and that happened to be my father. So at first I spent quite some time trying to interpret the dream. In my quest to find the answers, I came across a book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It aroused curiosity and a natural appetite to search for truth. Shortly after, I came across a YouTube video on meditation. The video talked about quietening the mind by inhaling and exhaling the breath. The idea of meditation somehow resonated with me. I started meditating on my breath. I felt a sense of peace and calm after each session. Next, I came across a book, I Am That. That's actually the name of the book, I Am That, by an Indian sage, Nisargadatta Maharaj. This book had a profound effect on how I looked at life. Things started connecting and I could sense clarity on many issues. Another book that had a profound effect on my ideas is this Chinese classic, Tao Te Ching. Apart from these three books, there is this website, conscious.tv. They have hundreds of video interviews of ordinary people on spiritual path. Contemplating on spiritual material and reflecting inwards, I believe, offered me clarity on bigger scheme of things, I guess. I would say I had a pretty ordinary life. I would sometimes think on spiritual matters, but I was not obsessed by it per se. Both my parents were practicing Muslims. My upbringing was fairly religious. Looking back, however, there was something in my childhood that was not quite ordinary. I had a nanny who was a Catholic. She would often take me to the church on Sundays, and my parents somehow didn't object to her taking me to the church. My parents would take me to the mosque on Fridays, so as a child, I closely observed both Muslim and Christian rituals. Although now it appears to be a little bizarre, but at the time it was perfectly normal for me. I also happened to go to a Catholic school. So because of this unique exposure, I developed a natural respect for both Islam and Christianity. Perhaps because of this, I never seriously believed that there could possibly be only one direct path to salvation. I believe that prophets like Buddha, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad were all divinely inspired human beings who were trying to explain the unexplainable. Their goal was to uncover the mysteries of the universe by walking down the spiritual path. With time, however, spirituality was mixed with politics to form a religious belief system. Here the motive was to propagate religious ideologies towards achieving the political agenda of certain groups. Religion in most cases was not propagated to spread spirituality, but it was used as a means to achieve the political ambitions of the rulers. Hypothetically speaking, if any of those great prophets were reborn, they would be quite surprised the way their faith is being practiced by a vast majority of Buddhists, Jews, Christians, or Muslims. The way the Holy Scriptures are interpreted would surprise them as well. The image of God as perceived by a vast majority of believers would also surprise them. The concept of God has been misunderstood because it cannot be conceived by our minds. The human imagination is limited within the scope of time and space. Anything beyond time and beyond space, mind cannot comprehend. In Urdu, my native language, the word for God is Khuda. Khud means self. Khuda, as I understand, means expanded self. In the words of Ramana Maharshi, mind is subtler than the atom. The self is subtler than the mind. In order for us to understand God, we have to understand ourselves. As Bible says, kingdom of God is within you. The self could only be understood by experiencing. Mirza Ghalib, a well-known Urdu poet, writes, "न था कुछ तो खुदा था, कुछ न होता तो खुदा होता, डुबोया मुझको होने ने, न होता मैं तो क्या होता." When there was nothing, God was there. If there were nothing, God would still be there. My own existence let me down, wondering what would I be if I were not me. As I see it, the bottom line is to access the inner space within us. Believing and not believing in God is irrelevant. Having said that, I personally think that in order for us to access the space within us, what we really need is an open mind. There is a saying that minds are like parachutes. They only function when open. The history, the culture, the politics, and the family environment all contribute to the way we think. And the key is not to add to this already heavily conditioned mind. In other words, spirituality is not about learning or believing or not believing in this or that. Spirituality is about unlearning. It's about emptying our minds from heavy conditioning and the belief system that we've inherited from our respective societies. It's about separating us from insisting on this or resisting from that. The gist of spirituality is not to insist, not to resist, but to coexist with the natural flow of life. Now, this is the real question. Who am I? We may say that I'm John or I'm Jane, but this is just a name being labeled on you by your parents. Well, perhaps I'm the body. Again, body is nothing but the billions and billions of atoms lumped together. According to science, more than 99% of atom is nothing but empty space. Less than 1% that we think is something is in fact nothing tangible either. It's simply energy. And also, atoms are constantly being replaced as we speak. The atoms that are currently a part of you may well be a part of a dinosaur millions of years ago. Almost all atoms in our bodies are replaced within a span of a year. So if you meet a person after a year, physically that person is not the same anymore. The atoms that constituted the body a year ago have now all been replaced. So clearly, body is not something that we can say is I. When we say I, we are referring to something that has not changed since we were little kids. That I we are referring to is not this body. The I that we are referring to is something that can neither be seen nor be touched, but we all know is there. French philosopher Teilhard de Chardin says, "We are not human beings having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience." True nature of the real self within you is silent, still, and never changing. As humans, everything we experience or notice is relative to some other experience. Imagine yourself in a moving car. The idea of another car in the next lane moving faster or slower depends on how fast your own car is moving. If both cars on parallel lanes are moving at exactly the same speed, you won't be able to sense the movement of the other vehicle. The same principle basically applies to how you perceive life around you. All human experiences are relative to the true nature of the silent observer within you, the witness of all experiences. We hear the sound because the I within us is silent. We see change around us because the real self within us is changeless. We experience movement all around us because the self, the observer within you, is still. We can hence connect with our higher self in silence and stillness. Everything you experience with your 5 humanly senses is precisely because you're nothing but you experience. All words and thoughts that makes you believe a human is in fact like tiny bits of clouds floating within the vast emptiness of your higher self. From a distance, an ordinary looking star may appear like a twinkling dot. When we focus on this tiny dot through a powerful telescope, we realize that this little dot is indeed an entire galaxy with hundreds of millions of stars. Those stars within that galaxy are millions of miles apart from each other. Now this is the enormity of space within what we thought was a little dot. On a flip side, when we look at a person, although the person may appear to be less than 6 feet tall, but there's an entire universe hidden within him. There are billions of cells. Every cell has its own life. They follow an orderly path to make sure that our body stays healthy. Each cell has millions of atoms. Every atom is a reflection of our solar system. Indian mystic Kabir once said, "All know that the drop merges into the ocean, but few know that the ocean merges into the drop." One way to access the inner space within us is through meditation. Meditation is a practice of controlling thought pollution. Just like noise pollution prevents us from listening to the sounds of nature, light pollution makes it harder to appreciate the beauty of the night sky. Similarly, thought pollution makes it difficult for us to recognize the spaciousness, the beauty and the wisdom of our inner self. Mental noise prevents us from experiencing our true nature by interpreting, reinterpreting, and judging every situation that we find ourselves in. We are certainly more aware of ourselves in thoughtless state. Thoughts are mostly either of the past or the future. So in a way, awareness in thoughtless state is experiencing life as it is, versus thinking makes us imagine life. In thoughtless state, we are aware of our surroundings without the clouds of thoughts. We can hence experience life in much more detail. Sleep, someone said, is unconscious meditation. Meditation is conscious sleep. Every night our mind connects with the universal consciousness in the form of deep sleep. Deep sleep is nothing but a thoughtless state that we are not conscious about. Meditation is again a thoughtless state, but it is a thoughtless state that we are conscious about. Unfortunately, sleep is often stigmatized. Sleep-deprived people gain bragging rights in corporate culture. Lack of sleep essentially clouds a judgment the same way as perhaps drunk driving. The best time to meditate is after a good night's sleep, because we are already in thoughtless state in deep sleep. Meditating immediately after we wake up from sleep will make it easier to get in touch with our inner wisdom. The thinking process that kicks in after waking up slowly pumps up the ego. We have to cut through the ego to touch base with the consciousness within us. If we wake up naturally at 7 in the morning, the best time to meditate is 7. If we naturally wake up at 2 in the morning, the best time to meditate is 2. Some people may not like the idea of meditating in the middle of night. They may view it as disrupting sleep. The fact is that sleep and meditation are closely related. They in fact complement each other. Sleep helps with more insightful meditative experience, and meditation helps enhance the quality of sleep. Anyone thinking that by meditating they may have to compromise sleep is indeed looking for a pleasant surprise. Different people respond to different meditation techniques. I may respond to Vipassana and you may prefer transcendental technique. Someone else might access the thoughtless state by listening to music or through dancing or by being in nature. Every person has to dive within him or her to discover the meditation that resonates with her. It is a trial and error thing, but suggesting that one meditation technique is superior to the other is yet another belief that needs to be discarded. In the end, it's not about techniques or concepts, but it's the freedom from all techniques and all concepts that help us realize our true self. People subconsciously realize that the body is not the whole picture. There is a reality behind what their senses perceive as body. Religious scriptures came up with this term soul to explain the real self behind the material body. This created confusion in the minds of people. Since people saw themselves as separate beings, they started imagining as if there is a separate reality behind each individual. They couldn't comprehend that there could be only one reality behind all manifestations. The Quran says that God created humanity from a single soul. Sometimes we tend to overlook the most important message hidden in scriptures. Love is a longing for completeness, the single most powerful force behind all universal forces. Forces like magnetic attractions, gravitational attractions, sexual attractions, romantic attractions are all manifestations of love. The force that orchestrates the universal dance of pull and push, expansion and contraction, pleasure and pain, attraction and repulsion. Love in its purest form is experienced when we see ourselves beyond our own imaginary bodies. Amir Khusro, a Sufi mystic, says, "Manto shudam tu man shudi, mantan shudam tu jan shudi, takas neboyad Podzi mandigaram tu digari." I'm you and you are me. I'm the body and you are the soul. And from hereafter, nobody should say that I'm separate from you. Remember the very first time you fell in love with someone? That indeed was a magical moment. It's nature's way to get in touch with the spirituality within us. It is spiritual because we first-hand witness our own beauty in the eyes of someone else. That experience is both joyful and painful. It is joyful because you see your own reflection in another person. It is painful because you can still experience separation. The contradictory experience of both joy and pain makes the experience of love like a ride filled with pleasure. Urdu poet Mirza Ghalib beautifully expresses this connection between love and pain in his poem. He writes, इश्क से तबीयत ने ज़ीस्त का मज़ा पाया, दर्द की दवा पाई, दर्द पे दवा पाया. Through love, the self experiences the pleasure of pain. Love is the cure for pain, and yet the pain is incurable. People have tried defining consciousness in different ways. The definition that I prefer is that consciousness cannot be imagined, but it makes imagining possible. Human imagination is limited within the scope of time and space. Anything beyond time and beyond space, mind cannot comprehend. Everything we experience is because we are indeed conscious. But to describe consciousness, we have to collect our thoughts, which again, in essence, is a product of imagination. So, by describing consciousness, we indeed are limiting its scope to human imagination. On surface, it may seem that we are separate, but this is yet another illusion. We share the same consciousness as anyone else, or as a matter of fact, anything else. We can relate to each other's experiences. We can feel people's pains and joys. It confirms the fact that we share the same consciousness. In Zen Buddhism, the formula for truth is plus A plus minus A equals to 0, the great nothingness. Everything springs from nothingness, everything dissolves in nothingness. All opposites and contradictions are reconciled in nothingness. This is the basic truth of life. Life of not a single individual, but life as a whole. Everything that is perceivable or anything that is beyond the scope of human imagination owes its existence to one ultimate reality. You may call it God, you may call it Allah, you may call it consciousness, you may call it Tao. Calling reality with any name does not alter the fact behind all existence. One does not have to believe in truth, one has to live it. In our native language we say, Hakki to shakal shabi nahi, makan hai la makan. Truth has no face or feature. Space is endless space. Some mystics, for the lack of a better word, describe the spiritual experience as emptiness or nothingness. Now, this doesn't mean that there's nothing out there to experience. It basically means that all experiences surface from emptiness, nothing that human vocabulary can describe. Scientists also use similar phrases like dark matter or dark energy. The mathematical model suggests that known matter is only a tiny fraction of our universe. Building blocks for the vast majority of the universe are made with something we cannot sense. So they call it dark matter. Everything that we can sense is made of atoms, which again is mostly empty space. This is an age-old question which still doesn't have a clear answer. Arguments have been laid out by scientists and philosophers, both for and against the notion of free will. Einstein, for instance, was a determinist. He seemed to be convinced that the idea of free will is an illusion. He once said in an interview, Everything is determined, the beginning as well as the end, by forces over which we have no control. It is determined for the insect as well as for the star, human beings, vegetables, or cosmic dust. We all dance to a mysterious tune. Another equally brilliant scientist, Heisenberg, on the other hand, believed in somewhat limited free will. Philosophers are also equally divided. Noam Chomsky, a well-respected philosopher of our times, believes in free will. Ramana Maharshi, an Indian sage and mystic, was a determinist, like Einstein. Personally speaking, I think free will is an illusion. To some degree, we all recognize that we have no control over the most significant events of our lives, our birth and our death. The question of free will is about the choices we make between these two major events. Actions like beating of our hearts or digesting our food are happening by itself as well. Even breathing is happening by itself until we focus our attention to breathing. By focusing our attention, our mind makes us believe that somehow we have free will to breathe. As advances are made in the fields of mental health and psychology, many ideas of free will turns out to be linked to causes other than free will. For instance, a brand new mom may feel guilty of being bitter and acrimonious, but this could be because of the postpartum depression, not because she's evil. Similarly, a student may feel guilty of not being attentive to his studies. This could be because of attention deficit disorder or ADHD. Now, a gifted student may label the ADHD patient as lazy, but this could well be far from truth. The student suffering from attention deficit might be working twice as hard, but unfortunately he can't score better grades because of a disease that is beyond his control, not because he's lazy. We can find tons of examples where a person may well be under the illusion of free will rather than free will. Reality behind what we can see, hear, smell, taste, feel is not as it appears. In Vedic literature, they call it Maya, great illusion. Image that our brain constructs with the aid of our five senses cannot be trusted. Moon, for instance, appears to be bigger than stars. In reality, we know it's the other way around. The Earth appears to be stationary, but science tells us that it is moving at a great speed. Many stars we see may not even exist because of the time it takes for the light to travel. As science progresses, many sensory illusions are unraveled. Yes. This American neuroscientist, Benjamin Libet, first performed experiments on free will in 1980s. There were some objections raised on his methodology, so subsequent experiments with improved methodologies were performed by other scientists. Basically, a volunteer was asked to make a simple choice, something like raising right hand versus left hand. So, by observing brain activity, scientists could tell with reasonable accuracy a few seconds before the volunteer made the conscious choice. Now, the proponents of free will argue that this experiment only proves that choice is first made in subconscious before it becomes apparent to a person's conscious mind. Fair enough. So now the question is how we distinguish between a person's conscious versus subconscious mind. In simple terms, activities that we are aware of is happening in conscious mind. Everything going on in the background without the focus of our attention is happening in subconscious. So for example, while driving a car, I may also be talking to my friend sitting next to me. The focus of attention may be in the conversation, but the actual act of driving, balancing steering wheel, keeping an eye on the road, moving between gas pedal and the brakes, are all taken over by our subconscious mind. We cannot drive unless we can fully trust our subconscious. In the words of Alan Watts, conscious mind is like a spotlight and subconscious is like a floodlight. Confusion again is only in the minds of people because we see individuals as separate entities and we extend this assumption of separateness to our subconscious. So basically I would say subconscious is in reality a universal field of shared consciousness. When our limited attention is focused on something, we say we are conscious. When the attention is not focused, we say it's in the subconscious. Now, attention by nature is restless. Attention is constantly moving within the infinite field of subconscious. Mystics in meditative state slowly bring attention to stillness, perfectly aligning with the present moment in here and now. When the attention is still, the awareness instantly expands to the entire subconscious. The infinite field of floodlight illuminates into the spotlight. This state of awareness is where human sight can view with universal insight, where heartbeat is in sync with cosmic beat. Some mystics may describe this experience as consciousness absolute. To answer this, I would simply like to quote Jiddu Krishnamurti. He said, "Freedom is not a reaction. Freedom is not a choice. Freedom is found in the choiceless awareness of our daily existence and activity. Choice in every form is conflict. Contradiction is inevitable in choice. This contradiction, inner and outer, breeds confusion and misery." Indeed, it appears impractical, but as human beings, we can rationalize by looking at it from different perspectives. We can see from our observation that there are a few things that are within our grasp, but most of the things are beyond our control. In the case of my wife and I, we grew up in different parts of the planet, in very different environments. For us to get married, 10,000 things had to be in alignment too. Even if one event were not in alignment, perhaps we may not be married today. For anything to happen, the whole universe has to be in alignment. We individuals are not separate from the universe. So in that sense, of course, everything is within our power because we are the universe. However, our brain seems to control only a tiny fraction. In order for us to make things happen, all we can do is try to align whatever seems to be within our power and hope all else will fall in place. Sometimes things happen the way we had planned, but sometimes things may not turn out the way we wanted. Well, in that case, we have to make changes in our plan. This constant aligning and realigning our plans with the universal master plan is the game of life. According to Charles Darwin, it is not the strongest of the species that survive, nor the most intelligent, but the one most responsive to change. We prescribe, describe, and subscribe viewpoints to make sense of the shades of grey within this world of manifestations. The world that we perceive with our five senses is imperfect world full of contradictions. We try reconciling contradictions, but we cannot eliminate them. Hence we find paradoxes in this world of duality and illusions. On the other hand, the reality behind this world of manifestations is a perfect world of silence and simplicity. The world where there are no gray areas, no contradictions. Here there is no need to prescribe or describe, because all is one and one is all. We can sense this perfect world in stillness. When all five human senses go numb, a sixth sense of universal consciousness emerges. As Bible says, "Be still and know that I am God." Science is the manual that explains how the universe works. Spirituality is the source of inspiration that scientists first receives in the form of an inkling. The ideas that pop up in the minds of scientists originate in the great silence of consciousness. Similarly, the philosophers, the artists, the musicians all catch their original ideas from the universal consciousness. As Einstein says, the intellect has little to do on the road to discovery. There comes a leap in consciousness, call it intuition or what you will. The solution comes to you and you don't know how or why. The most productive time for Einstein in terms of ideas was when he was working at a patent office. The rest of his life was basically spent explaining those ideas. That perhaps is the reason why we get the best ideas in shower. It's when the mind is relaxed and in tune with the higher self. Science and philosophy complement each other. Philosophy helps extend the frontiers of human imagination. It provides an imaginative space to play with various ideas. Science needs this imaginative room to experiment with the possibilities. Once a philosophical point becomes a scientific fact, the launching pad for philosophy extends the frontiers of imagination even further. This way, science helps us to understand the mechanics of the universe, and philosophy helps science extend the imaginative room it needs to play with potential possibilities. I'm not a scientist, but as an observer, I hope string theory or any other leap in science could one day give us some clues on mystical experiences. The reason why string theory makes people excited is because of the potential it has of fundamentally changing the laws of physics as we know it. One of the things that the string theory talks about is the possibility of other dimensions. It also talks about the strings at the subatomic level that vibrates at different frequencies. Differences in vibrations could be the reason why we see differences in stuff all around the universe. Now, the vocabulary used by scientists in describing the string theory is strikingly similar to the one used by mystics in describing their peak experiences. The mystics also talk about other dimensions that cannot be perceived by regular human senses. They describe themselves as a universal energy that flows into everything. The subtle vibrations could be tuned to a frequency that only a quiet mind can sense. One big unsolved mystery of science is the missing link between quantum mechanics and the theory of relativity. By solving this puzzle, we could not only unify quantum mechanics with relativity, but it could potentially reconcile science with spirituality. After all, spirituality is simply an experiential path that transcends 5 human senses. There got to be a scientific explanation to spiritual experiences. A rational mind can certainly appreciate and understand spirituality, but rationality is not a requirement though. Rationality of mind holds to the conventional wisdom of the time. What we view as rational may not be shared by ancient societies. Spirituality is not bound by time. It in fact is a timeless reality. So to think that spirituality could be understood by a well-reasoned rational mind may not necessarily be true. Understanding spirituality requires a quiet mind, not a rational mind. The only certainty on spiritual path is to expect the unexpected. All expectations breed in thoughts. Spiritual experiences happen in thoughtless state. Divinity permeates from the gaps between thoughts. Let me give a personal example. I have been listening to a song from a Sufi poet, Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai. The wordings were something like, "Within I is your presence, to I the universe owes its existence." I got so much immersed in that song that I burst into tears. It was an amazing feeling. Even now, when I listen to that song, I secretly hope to experience the same effect. But it never happened again. It happened because I had no expectations. Now the expectation is preventing a similar experience. This is a misconception that many of us have. We associate an awakened person with saints, though they could also be sinners. An awakened person could both be educated as well as totally illiterate. He could be nice, or he could even be nasty. These traits are nothing more than our personal opinions. A newborn child is an awakened state until the emergence of ego. The ego transforms an innocent observer into an imaginative doer. The doer flips the wings of resistance to form the ripples of duality. We mistakenly label these ripples as good and evil, as saints and sinners, as nice and mean. The awakened state is experiencing the natural flow of life beyond the effects of these labels of duality. An awakened person knows that the so-called ordinary person is extraordinary as well. She realizes that she is not separate from other beings. She is by no means superior to other people. A regular person assumes that an awakened person is superior. He imagines that an awakened person is separate from him. In essence, there's no difference. The difference is only in the mind. A person seeks awakening to recognize his true nature. An awakened person, in the process, liberates himself from the endless cycles of pain and pleasure, cycles of desires and aversions. He steps out of the world of illusion and can sense the world directly from his soul rather than seeking interpretations from humanly senses. Awakening is a part of human evolution. The process of awakening is going on for centuries, just like human evolution. The process has now accelerated at an exponential pace though. Again, life in general is getting faster. Universe is expanding at an accelerated pace. Everything within the universe is responding to the expansion of cosmos. To every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Newton's law is not limited to the motions of objects. It is true to the movement of planets. It is true to the flow of life. Ego is the resistance to defend and extend individuality. It feeds on a person's desire to expand his individual identity, separate from the universal truth. Ego is the product of the mind. In spiritual domain, there is no resistance to prove or disprove anything. All is in complete harmony with universal consciousness. In the Abrahamic faiths, Satan is the symbol of resistance. In my view, the concept of devil is the personification of ego. Every moment, there is resistance at all levels. Resistance by the body, resistance by the mind, that ties the attention to the limited self. Resistance keeps the flame of separate identity alive in the form of ego. Once we surrender all our problems, we relax our body, relax our mind, the attention is released from the limited into the unlimited self. The realization of the unlimited self happens when the ego dissolves into the oneness of reality, the truth behind all existence. As Rumi says, ego is a veil between humans and God. A certain level of ego is necessary for us to function in the material world. Material world exists in the thinking state. Beyond thought, there is no ego. Spirituality is an experience of thoughtless state where ego cannot survive. There is no need to consciously try to rid ego. It's an automatic process. Ego naturally disappears in the thoughtless state. Be aware of the gaps between thoughts. Thinking about how to rid ego is a useless fight that you cannot win. Simply stop thinking and ego shall dissolve automatically. I like the yardstick suggested by Ramana Maharshi. He says that the degree of freedom from unwanted thoughts is a measure to gauge spiritual progress. Thoughts serve as good servants but bad masters. When a mind gets occupied by uncontrolled thoughts, it could lead us to depression, versus a clear focus on controlled thoughts could lead to scientific breakthroughs. There is nothing inherently wrong with negative emotions. These are simply unpleasant feelings that every human being has to experience. Everything we experience in the material world is relative to some other experience. Conceptually speaking, everything in the universe is black and white. However, practically speaking, we mostly witness the world as a shade of gray. To experience the light, we should experience the shadow. To appreciate sweetness, we should experience the bitterness. To enjoy the summer, we should experience the winter. There's nothing inherently wrong with winter. There's nothing to be guilty of winter. It's a natural phenomenon that we simply have to experience as a human being. The best way to get rid of resentment, jealousy, or hatred is to understand that these feelings don't make you an evil person. Whatever you experience, whenever you experience the negative emotions, simply observe them. Do not resist them, because the more you resist, the longer they persist. Since you cannot be guilty of being human, hence you should not be guilty of possessing human characteristics. By giving negative emotions the space, by acknowledging the existence of all such emotions, without resisting them, these negative emotions will soon subside. The negative emotions will soon be replaced with the positive emotions. Positive emotions like love and contentment are the natural rest position of the emotional pendulum. Pain and suffering is essential for evolution and growth. Without experiencing pain, self-inquiry is incomplete. Rumi tells the story of an ant creeping across a Persian carpet. The ant complains, saying, "What is this? These bumps and strange colors and patterns. This must have been created just as a meaningless obstacle. What a useless thing to have made." But of course, the carpet maker, looking at it from above, can understand the bigger scheme of colors and patterns. For him, the carpet makes perfect sense. Without experiencing pain, we cannot fully comprehend pleasure. Pain and pleasure are like patterns of weather. Good weather is followed by bad weather. Many times we get a string of bad news, just like at times we experience bad weather for days before sunshine finally shines and a cycle of good weather kicks in. Good and evil are the balancing acts of nature. They always go hand in hand. It had always been like that, and it shall always be like that. The reason we hear more about the evil side of the equation is because it receives bigger headlines. A lot of good work is being carried on quietly. People are living longer and healthier than ever before. Scientific advancements have brought people closer. Wisdom of universal consciousness is being recognized. These indeed are huge achievements in a relatively short span of time. Happiness is a short-term gratification tied to happenings in life, hence the word happiness. It is conditional to if this happens or if that happens. Mind is always restless with a moving goalpost. We imagine ourselves to be happy if we could find a dream job. For a short while, our gratification is fulfilled when the dream job lands on our lap. But then the goalpost moves to another direction, tied to yet another happening. So happiness is always tied to the next house, the next car, the next relationship, the next venture, the next vacation, the next project. Although we associate happiness with the true inner satisfaction, but truly, it's always a short-term gratification. True inner happiness is not in future. It is not tied to future happening. True happiness is found in the present moment. Our mind makes us believe that present moment is only a very tiny fraction of time. Perhaps because mind cannot hold attention in the present moment. Attention keeps swinging from past to future, missing the reference point of the presence. Once we hold attention in the moment, we realize that present is where time is infinite and the space is limitless, where gratification is not tied to happenings. Here things happen without expecting. Here gratification bursts like a fountain of joy. Because of my Muslim background, people do ask me this question. What I see is history repeating itself. Islam is approximately 600 years younger than Christianity. 600 years back, Christianity was going through chaotic times as well. A clash between the Dark Ages and the effects of early Renaissance was not pretty. When you mix spirituality with politics, you get religion. When you mix religion with politics, the contents of spirituality are further diluted, giving rise to a more rigid form of a belief system. A system where every group truly believes that only their interpretation is the right path. This kind of mindset triggers blind spots that translate into a fractured society. The West passed through the process and realized that church and state need to be separated. Many Muslim countries are going through a similar process right now, and eventually they will also come to the same realization. But this has to be played out naturally as an evolutionary process. Death is the veil of ignorance. When we cannot see beyond a certain point, or if something is beyond our comprehension, we assume that this is the end. It could well be the beginning of something even more exciting. We mistakenly assume that the opposite of life is death. Eckhart Tolle, the author of Power of Now, writes that the opposite of death is actually birth. Life has no opposite. Life is beyond the scope of time and space. It transcends human imagination. Some esoteric traditions within Islam use the term asal me vasal, meaning merging with reality. Instead of saying, may the soul of the deceased rest in eternal peace, they pray, may the soul merge with reality. In essence, everything is one with reality anyways. It's the illusion created by our minds that makes us imagine separation. Death dissolves the mind and the oneness with reality becomes obvious. Every individual perhaps may have to find meaning in his own way. For me, the meaning of life is to discover my own self. We as humans are caught in endless cycles of desires and aversions. Either we desire to have things we like, or we try to avoid things we don't like. In order for us to escape the endless cycles of desires and aversions, we need to experience life beyond thoughts. After all, desires and aversions can survive only in thinking state. Beyond thought, one can experience life in its purity. I seek inspiration from Tao Te Ching. It says, free from desire, you realize the mystery. Caught in desire, you see only manifestations. To unlock the mystery, we need to look beyond manifestations. Now you may ask, well, what is the reason behind all manifestations? It's a valid question, but unfortunately, it doesn't have a clear answer. I live in Ontario, Canada, and our slogan is yours to discover. Perhaps it's the nature of evolution that each of us has to discover within himself or herself. Someone associated the meaning of life with the logic of prime numbers. Prime numbers are what is left when you have taken all the patterns away. They're very logical, but you could never work out the rules. As I understand, the overall message of the dream was to connect with my inner self. To elaborate further, let me try to piece it together. The wordings were, truth of life is love, meaning the underlying current behind all manifestations is longing to be in union with the source of life. Love of life is death, meaning when the veil of illusion is lifted, the union with the source becomes obvious. Death of life is unknown, meaning try to look for the significance of life behind the cycle of birth and death. To know the unknown is truth, meaning the truth behind all existence is a single life that sustains all. There's no such thing as final truth. Truth is beyond words and beyond ideas. What I say here is my interpretation and my understanding of the truth. My understanding of this universe is constantly evolving. If I believe exactly the way I believed 10 years ago, then I've wasted 10 years of my life. Aristotle suggested that moving objects eventually slow down because they get tired. For modern science, this idea of Aristotle may seem stupid, but it made perfect sense for almost 2 millenniums. With scientific breakthroughs in the shape of Newtonian laws, we now have better explanation of why objects slow down or fall back on Earth. With future scientific advancements, perhaps the Newtonian laws may seem a little too simplistic. Human understanding is like layers of onion. We have to uncover a layer to move to the next. Each layer of understanding brings with it a set of vocabulary and ideas. Every layer leads us to the next level of understanding with yet another set of vocabulary and ideas. The process is part and parcel of human evolution. I think I'm still walking on this path for a better understanding of my true self. The journey has not ended. In fact, the journey may never end. And as the journey proceeds, my understanding of life may change. The words may change. The characters may change. But the life within each character stays the same. I would like to conclude with a quote from Rumi. He says, "Silence is the language of God. All else is a poor translation."